Next on Curate, flipping through his comics is more than just a super adventure.
Even through the past, everything comes back to Virginia.
Uncovering art from the past that has a message for today.
What's really interesting about the story here is that the whitewash ended up preserving the mural.
Enlightening young minds about one of our darkest times.
Each one speaks to you differently. Some are funny, some are sweet, and some just tug at your heartstrings.
Discovering new insights into one of the greatest statesmen in history.
Loved to paint landscapes and seascapes. He once commented that he liked to paint trees because they don't talk back to you or criticize your work.
It's all ahead on Curate. Thanks for joining us. I'm Heather Mazzoni.
I'm Jason Gipros, and welcome to Curate. This week, as we showcase creative minds from around Hampton Roads and across America, we take a look at how works of art can reflect powerful changes in society.
As a kid, Willie Cordy Jr. spent a lot of his time in Portsmouth comic book stores, transported by the adventures to faraway places.
Today, he creates his own comics, reaching a new generation of readers, teaching them that heroes can live much closer to home. He hopes the message soars beyond the pages.
I'm from Portsmouth. It was important for me to tell my story about my characters here in Virginia.
I don't fit in your box. I don't match your world.
The allure that pulled me in was adventures. It was stories that, you as a normal person wouldn't go through. As a young kid, I used to always draw comic book characters, and I used to come up with some little funky outfits and little costumes and stuff. And I used to imagine what that character would be like. Who is this character? And you develop a personality for that character. I've read a lot of comic books in the past, and sometimes I felt like something was missing. So for me, I felt like I needed to tell my stories. The bottom of my logo is the skyline of Portsmouth, because this is our home. My storyline itself is about Hampton Roads, some heroes, villains, government conspiracy and corruptions, but with a meta-human twist to it. And if you look at everything that happens throughout the world, if you look at even through the past, when it comes to government, everything comes back to Virginia. This is the perfect place. It made sense, and as Spock would say, it was logical. I don't want too many big ones, so I'll come back in and hit it with some smaller ones. Bow, bow. Gives it it's better than trying to stipple everything. Oh my God, you would go crazy trying to stipple all of these stars. The one thing that was very important for me was to make sure that I could show characters that look like us, that would resemble us, and that will pull kids in. It's like my comic book is full of multicultural characters, African American, Hispanic, Asian, and so on and so forth. I grew up with my predominantly white characters in comics. So like my first superhero black character I remember was the Black Panther. And then it was the Falcon, and then I love those characters coming up. So I want people to have that, kids to have that same thing when they see these characters, Soul, Lady Satya, Fingers, and Mr. Solomon.
Sometimes we go unnoticed. When after the lifeline, we are the resistance.
When I look around Hampton Roads, it brings back so many memories that I know somebody else would love it too. And when I talk about my book, and especially people that I know, and I point things out in my book, they're like, oh my God. And they can't believe that I drew that. And they're like, I even drew Lincoln Park. It has its history. Don't get me wrong. It has its ups and downs. It's like almost like to show good times, After living here, I could deal with anything. I could deal with any culture, anything that comes my way. And whether I'm going into a boardroom or somebody's club, I felt like I was okay.
People wanna talk about us. People wanna lie on us. Try to bring us down and tell us we can't be what we dream.
I actually have 12 different covers for issue 6. When I started, I had 11 stores that showed me love. Bought my books right off the bat, put them in their stores, and started selling them. And they're all located right here in Hampton Roads, so each one of those covers will represent each store, and it'll be a variant at each store. This one's the Xeno store cover, and that's the owner of the store. That's Wayne, and see, Wayne's fighting off the zombies, so the zombies can't get the comics.
You can try to get in my way.
Willie started coming in ages ago when he was younger, way younger than we both were. It was a good time. He was always a good kid and became a good adult. And his art style was always something that was cool. He always showed off his art and such. And when he first did the book, we were like, yeah, we'll support a local character. So we helped him out and just push his book and show it off. And it's been a good thing for both of us.
Since I've done City Earth, oh my God, I've been on TV shows. I've been in like six newspapers. I've won Best Educator. Well, right now I'm teaching. I'm an adjunct professor at Norfolk State. Right there. And drop the color in. Okay, now zoom out again. And like my son, he's learning, like he does most of the flatting. Like over the last 3 days, he's been like grinding it. But he's getting to a part where he's starting to get the highlights and the shadows and stuff too. I feel like comic book artists don't get the credit that they're due. A comic book artist can draw cars, building, people, animals, landscapes. So I can go on and on. I don't think I'm ever going to stop doing my comics. To build City Earth into its a full business, full-blown comic book industry that has a home base right here in Hampton Roads. You know, New York has Marvel Comics and all the other comic book companies in different cities. I want the premier comic book company to be City Earth right here.
To find out more about Willie Cordy Jr. and his graphic art, visit our website, whro.org/curate.
What does a comic book and a nearly 100-year-old mural have in common? Well, they can both break with traditions and create powerful social commentary. We travel now to Los Angeles, where a controversial mural, covered up for decades, is once again seeing the light of day. It's sending a political statement to a new generation.
The artist that we showcase is David Alfaro Siqueiros. He's one of the 3 great Mexican masters of the early 20th century. The idea was to promote Olvera Street, to do a promotional mural on the top of the Italian Hall, and to paint something that would, kind of give an idea of the Mexican flavor of Olvera Street, the Mexican marketplace. I don't believe they really understood his politics, his deep commitment to communism and socialism. And so when he painted this image, it became very controversial. So this kind of Mexican imagery that was popular in the 1930s, the use of Spanish or Mexican images in like orange crates or other kind of marketing materials of Mexicans with the large sombrero and cactus behind you. That's what they were thinking they were going to get. So they give them the title Tropical America, thinking it's going to be tropical with fruits and animals. He kind of gave them a little bit of something like that, but he was very radical. And so his America Tropical linked South America, Central America, and North America, a deep understanding of the indigenous populations and how they were the ones who helped create the civilizations throughout these Americas. This is what he paints, and it's more of a historical image and one that combines all the Americas together. And that's what makes it so powerful, is that I don't think people were expecting anything close to what he painted. Ideas of large jungles, chacomol figures at the bottom of the mural, 2 sharpshooters, a Peruvian and a Mexican, aiming their gun at the capitalist eagle, And then in the center, on the very last day, he paints this indigenous figure on a double cross. So you see this almost Christ-like figure substituted with, instead of a dove, a capitalist eagle perched above it. And so it just shows the type of imperialism and domination of the indigenous population. It was a big shock to the people who commissioned it. It was up for about 2 years before it got whitewashed, but because it was such a large image, 18 by 80 feet, and because of the use of images with guns, aiming their weapons at the eagle, that was just deemed to be too controversial. So that side was whitewashed first, and then about 4 years later, the rest of the mural was whitewashed completely. Right after he painted this mural, and his visa was denied. So he went down to South America and he continued to paint and be very prolific. Essentially, it was denied for his political activity. And so the 40s, and then later on into the 1950s, and then even into the 1960s, this remains covered under a film of white paint. And it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And so people, I think, in large degree, didn't even know it was there. But by the late 1960s, the sun, the wind, the rain begins to take off that whitewash. And the image or the ghost of America Tropical starts to become visible from the street again. What's really interesting about the story here is that the whitewash ended up preserving the mural. To me, it's like the story of water in Los Angeles, of being covered and then coming back, of all the work being done, and how it was an inspiration to a lot of muralists. So it has such a wonderful story.
The Getty Conservation Institute restored the 1932 mural at a cost of nearly $10 million.
A butterfly's life is as short as it is beautiful. Creating art about these delicate creatures is one way the Holocaust Museum in Houston, Texas is teaching today's children about one of history's darkest times.
Butterflies really embody transformation and transcendence. Through this project, you feel that. The poem by Pavel Friedman called The Butterfly inspired us to create a lesson plan that we took to schools starting here in the Houston area and then eventually worldwide, that gave the kids an opportunity to identify with the loss of 1.5 million children. Kids were asked to draw butterflies, create some sort of butterfly that they could commemorate to a child lost in the Holocaust. And they would hang these delicate, fragile, beautiful butterflies, and they'd hang them from their classroom ceilings. Kids would come into their classroom. It was beautiful, it was wonderful, it was delicate, it was just as amazing as any butterfly would be. And the teacher would come in one day and she would randomly cut down their butterfly. And this, you can imagine, made children upset, saddened, angry. Why'd you cut down my butterfly? Well, the truth is, there was no reason. There was no reason the children of the Holocaust perished as well. So that lesson connected the kids of today to the children of the Holocaust.
My mother was a Holocaust survivor. About 11 years ago, when the Holocaust Museum Houston was celebrating its 10th anniversary, I interviewed my mother for the project. I was looking through photos of hers, old photos, and I found for the very first time a picture of her little sister, and she was in a butterfly costume. She perished upon arrival in Auschwitz. That has been chilling to me ever since.
My father was a survivor to me like no other. For me as his daughter, to watch how someone can overcome so much and still be hopeful about the world that we live in, I was always in awe of that. These butterflies came to us from all over the world. With the exception of one continent, Antarctica, we received them from everywhere. We created an exhibit in our museum for people to see. And we started a traveling exhibit, which many Houstonians can now see here in Houston at 2 Allen Center. We have a wonderful exhibit that's going to be here for 3 months.
Butterflies are made of all media: wire, fabric, glass, metal, paper, origami, crochet, needlepoint. There also are fragments of poems, the poems that were written in Theresienstadt on some of these butterflies, as well as some of the names of the children who perished at this time.
Each one speaks to you differently. Some are funny, some are sweet, and some just tug at your heartstrings. In just a short few years, we won't have any Holocaust survivors that can actually go into the schools, go out into the community and talk about their experiences. And so it's up to us, second generation, third generation, to carry on their message of hope. If we leave no other message than hope for tomorrow through this project, then we've won. The Butterfly Project can go on, and it will continue to resonate with children of tomorrow as well.
The Houston Holocaust Museum offers a lesson plan that can be downloaded about the Butterfly Project. You'll find more information on it at whro.org/curate. Sir Winston Churchill was a legendary orator and famously led Britain through World War II as her prime minister.
But did you know that he was also a highly skilled artist? Many of his paintings on display in St. Louis are revealing a complex story behind the man known as the British Bulldog.
This exhibition brings together 45 paintings by Sir Winston Churchill, spanning every decade that he was active as a painter, from 1915 through the late 1950s. Audiences who visit the exhibition will see distinct, small, intimate rooms of Churchill's paintings. We have one room, for instance, that's devoted to his love affair with France and French landscapes and French seascapes. We have another room that shows his great admiration for the landscapes and architecture of England. We have a great gallery here featuring his work from the city of Marrakesh. So really, it's thematically organized throughout the exhibition by subject matter.
One of my early memories of my grandfather was standing behind him as he was painting at the easel. One day he decided to paint a still life. He'd been given this big bottle as a present for Christmas. And then he said, go around and get lots of other bottles and things from the different parts of the house, and glasses and cigar boxes, and we'll put them together and I will be able to paint a still life. And he called this bottlescape as opposed to landscape or seascape.
Churchill as a child and as a young man showed no inclination as a painter. As far as we know, he never picked up a crayon. He had no interest in the arts. He was a military man. Eventually rose up to the rank of First Lord of the Admiralty right before the years of World War I. He was in charge of all of British naval forces when the First World War broke out. Shortly thereafter, there was this horrendous stalemate in the trenches in Europe. And Churchill, ever the creative figure, decided that if he had a battle plan to come along and invade the Ottoman Turks on the Eastern Front, it would relieve the pressure in the trenches, thereby shortening the Great War. Gallipoli failed, and it was a disaster. The 250,000 Allied forces lost their lives, and Churchill lost his job. Churchill was forced to resign his post as First Lord of the Admiralty and was, by all accounts from family and friends, in despair, despondent, and quite depressed. In fact, we know from eyewitness accounts that it took a distraction of painting, to get Churchill out of this foul mood. And by exploring the color and light and observing the natural world around him, he was able to alleviate some of the stresses from the First World War. And it really changed his life, and he never looked back. He painted from that point onward in his life. People often ask, does Churchill mix his painting and politics? And for the most part, the answer is no. He loved the natural world, loved to paint landscapes and seascapes. He once commented that he liked to paint trees because they don't talk back to you or criticize your work. So that's what you see really here in the exhibition. It's his love of natural beauty, of nature, the sea, the mountains, light reflecting on all of those subjects was what fascinated Churchill most. This painting dates from 1938 and is called Beach at Walmer, a time when Churchill is a member of Parliament but without ministerial office. And he is a virtual lone voice in the wilderness saying that Britain should arm, knowing full well that there was a looming Nazi threat building up on the continent. In fact, Churchill's warnings of the Nazi threat went unnoticed to a government and a people who preferred appeasement. And at this time, Churchill paints this picture of a family bathing in the southern English coast. Across the channel lies France, and he places this foreboding Napoleonic-era cannon on the beach as if to say, we must arm, as he did so famously in the broadcast of 1938 to the American people. And in the painting, in the surf, there's a lone figure with a little tuft of red hair. That is Winston Churchill himself. This painting is called Tower of Kutubiyya Mosque, and it's the only painting that Churchill painted during the Second World War. It dates from 1943 in January, shortly after the Casablanca Conference, where Churchill and President Roosevelt met to discuss the outcome of the Second World War. It shows the sun setting on the Atlas Mountains with the city of Marrakesh in the foreground. And interestingly enough, and only Churchill could do this, he convinced, after the Casablanca Conference, Roosevelt to travel about 150 miles from Casablanca to the city of Marrakesh only so they could watch the sunset bathe on the Atlas Mountains. The two leaders did so. They shared a moment. Shortly thereafter, Churchill asked his aides and assistants, "Fetch me my paint box. I'd like to capture this moment." He did so, painting this painting, which he later then gave to President Roosevelt as a memento of this great relationship between these two leaders. I don't think you can separate Churchill the speaker, Churchill the writer, Churchill the war planner from Churchill the painter. The creativity, the visionary thinking, the ability to see the world in all of its component parts, a very complex world, is like seeing a complex canvas and organizing those elements of a painting that only Winston Churchill could do. For that reason, I think his painting reflects his ultra creativity and is a wonderful reflection of the man that Sir Winston Churchill was.
Grandpapa said, when I get to heaven, I mean to spend my first 1,000,000 years in painting and so get to the bottom of the subject. I myself like to picture my grandfather on a fluffy white cloud, painting away to his heart's content. And finding even new colors to play with.
While many of the paintings are owned by his family, one of his works recently sold at auction for nearly $250,000.
I have to think the paintings brought him peace at such a turbulent time.
Absolutely. Well, that's going to wrap up this week's Curate. Thanks for joining us.
And for more on arts and culture or the artists and stories you've seen on this broadcast, head to whro.org/curate.
And continue the conversation on our Facebook page. I'm Jason Kipros. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Heather Mazzoni. We'll see you next time on Curate.